angel investments. So, I'll let you go first, Chuck, and then you can go stay and listen to what he has to say about angel investments and provide whatever comments you think might be useful to our class. First, let me introduce you. I have some biographical information. I hope it's right.
It's way too long and way too dry. I need to update that for you. Yeah.
This is not no, I've never heard of Cascade, but I've been doing it long.
That's just a company I use. That's my angel investor.
Okay, so he has an angel investing company called
General
Cascade Day Trading, LLC. We invest in real estate, restaurants, and technology. As I told you earlier in the semester, he's a co-owner of Honey Brothers Coffee. He's also a member of the board of Skyline Chili, which has 140 stores.
Almost 150.
What I like about him, just to summarize all of this, in addition to being a great guy, is his trajectory from Yorba Law School. Because he left here and went to work with Greenbaum. And he was there 3 to 4 years doing corporate business stuff that all of you have a real interest in. And at some point, his brother developed this little pizza company that goes to a big pizza company. And I think before they went public, you changed from Greenbaum to go help your brother out.
Yeah, in 91, we went public in 93.
So he was there 2 years when they actually start, I guess, cleaning up for the public offering, because there's a lot of lead time, right? You gotta make sure a lot of things are right in terms of imagery, in terms of corporate minutes, in terms of other things you have to file as an appendix for the Form S1. So he became a member of the board, Papa John's General Counsel, Vice President, Secretary, and Chief Development Officer. Those are successive posts, right? Not all at once.
Yeah.
And finally, in 2010, so 10 years ago, you left, and I'm sure you'll discuss a little bit about what you've done since you left. But again, doing routine corporate work, both in big transactions and small transactions, the way he started, he goes with a closely held company and helps convert it into a publicly held company. So he's seen corporate law from a lot of different perspectives that very few people have had the opportunity to do. So that makes his perspective, I think, unique among the people that are coming here this spring to talk with you. So with that, I'll turn it over to you, Chuck. Thank you so much for being here.
One thing I told Professor Warren is that never show up and talk to a group empty-handed, because if you hand out money or food, they tend to pay more attention. But one of my 2 companies I'm involved in, Honey Brothers Coffee, which has been around 25 years, and then the new one we just started, Biscuit Belly. We have 2 of those, and we're going to grow that to probably 6 or 10 in the next.
I haven't tried that one.
Yeah, we've got one in Nulu and one in St. Matthews.
Yes,
So
sir.
free biscuit and free
Wow.
coffee.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Make sure you don't get 2.
That's good for a date.
It's good. If you don't like it, we won't. I promise you won't go away hungry.
What is the food at Biscuit Belly?
Biscuit Belly is sort of a southern-inspired. Everything's on a biscuit. There's a lot of fried chicken. We've got a beef brisket that is, I think, phenomenal. We've got do have tofu, both fried and smoked. We've got some egg white fold over. If you're healthy, we got oatmeal. We've got a hot brown. But everything's basically on a southern style biscuit.
So it's a concept you started?
Yeah, I was co-founder of that with, and I'll give you guys just sort of what I've done since 2010, which has been it's all been fun. I just been, because Papa John's was so good to me, I've had the ability to do a lot of different things, and I spend most of my time during the day making sure I never have to go back to a corporate job. And so about 13 years ago, got in the coffee business, Honey Brothers. Got Lubino, I don't know if you guys know Lubino. We have 5 of those, 2 here in town, 2 in Indianapolis, 1 in Cincinnati. We just started Biscuit Belly. I'm involved with about a dozen other companies, either as an investor or board member. Some I just put money in, some I put money in several boards, some I'm, like these 2, I'm very, very active in every day. So I do some real estate. We've had a storage company that we started a couple of years ago. I do some co-investing with several guys that I've known for years. So that's what I do today. So I don't really, the only time I practice law these days is when I'm doing work on something that I own all or part of. So what I try to do in this talk, and feel free to ask any questions, or if you want to go a different direction, if you'd like this to be as much of a conversation as a lecture, not lecture. And I just kind of try to, I think it's about 4 years. You know, like Professor Warren said, sort of summarize what you've seen in your career, both good and bad, and having been in-house, which I think is a great advantage, and also have been in private practice. I've gleaned some hopefully some insight, and of course I've paid a lot of legal bills as in-house counsel. We work with a lot of outside lawyers, mostly on litigation, some SEC stuff. So, so with that, I just got a little presentation. I'll start in on it. If you guys jump in and ask any questions, we can say those to the end, however you want to do it. As Professor Warren said, I graduated from here in 1988. My grandfather actually graduated from this law school when it's still called the City Law School. My father and two of my uncles were both lawyers that went to law school here. And about 5 years ago now, my niece was the 4th generation to graduate from U of L Law School. So I come from a long line of lawyers. It's a genetic defect. You can't seem to get it out of the system, but I'm glad I did it. One of the things that's interesting I would tell is my partner, Mike Mays, in the coffee business. He and I both graduated from law school. He went to IU the same year. He started at Frost Brown Todd. I started with what was then Greenbaum Donald McDonald, which is now, I guess, now Denton. They changed their name. Denton. We both did corporate work. I was flying around the country with 2 British clients. We were buying up companies. I had an absolute ball, loved it. He hated every minute of it, and 22 months later he walked in and quit. As he said, he sort of tortured his parents. He went to college, went to law school, got great grades, got a great job, and then he just quit and moved to California. But once he started Heine Brothers 25 years ago, he will tell you that having a business degree and a legal background helped him dramatically in terms of, because he was able to set up his own company. They did their own bylaws. He had a buy-sell, which is the reason I'm in the company. They had an interesting provision in their buy-sell that said, anytime you can walk in with a check and I take it and sell you my stock, or if you want a check of an equal amount, I can buy yours. So about, it's been a little over 8 years ago now, he decided that he went to end his partnership with Gary Heine, and so I came in, we teamed up, presented Gary with an offer. He said, I can't match it, so we took it. And I had a little company called Vint. We merged those two together, and we now have 17 stores. As of next week, we'll have 18, or maybe this week, on Friday. We're going to probably grow that to 25 or 30 here in the southern Indiana, E-Town, Louisville, Lexington markets.
But you're leaving that one Vin on Franklin, which I love.
We are, but we're trying to figure out what to do with that. We kept one with Vint because Vint serves beer and wine. None of the Heine Brothers do, and it's a little bit different animal. It's been our test kitchen, but it's wildly expensive. They have different cups.
No, it's okay. I was looking for water, but I went out and got it for this speaker. Okay.
So anyway, we're trying to figure out what to do long term with Vint, but it does well. So that's where we are. And then, as he said, I went. I spent 3 years at Greenbaum. I went to Papa John's in '91, I mean, that was about as fun a ride as you can have, because when I was in law school, I used to either make pizza or deliver pizza, and then I was on the board before I was actually graduated from law school, and then busy crowd out there tonight. And then in 1991, they're full time. And as I say, in the 90s, in the 80s, Papa John's was interesting. In the 90s, it was exciting, and in the 2000s, it was terrifying, because I used to get on a plane and go to London or Moscow or California to go to work, and it was fun, but I got tired of doing that, so I left there in 2010.
When you left Greenbaum to go with Papa John's, how many units did Papa John's have?
Papa John's had just under 100.
So it had a substantial growth before you joined.
Yeah, it was. That's really sort of the late 80s, early 90s when it was taken off. And in the food business, I mean, just as an aside, it's like bankers. I don't know if you guys are any bankers, but I mean, people do not get out of the food business. They'll grow. In the 60s, these guys would have done Long John Silver's, and they sell those, and they get bored. Then they do Wendy's for a couple of years, and they sell those. And once one of them comes knocking on your door and likes the Papa John's model, it's just like, just the floodgates were open. So we went public in '93. That was an interesting experience. As I say, it's sort of like somebody coming in and taking your house and dumping it on your front, everything in your house out on your front lawn, and sort of rummaging through it and saying, why the hell do you have this? And God, that's an ugly sweater. And, you really need to clean that up. So and then you go public and they say, oh, put your house back together and run this thing, and you got to grow at 20 or 30% a year. But we made it through that and had a really good run through the 90s and into the 2000s. As I say, it was good enough to me that I now get to do what I want, not what I have to. So anyway, and from your guys' perspective, one of the things I like to talk about is accounting and law. If you're going to be a business lawyer, you better understand something about accounting. As I say, law is the rules of the game. Accounting is the language of business. And you don't have to be an accounting minor or an accounting major, but you need to understand. And I'm sure we talked about it
Sure.
if you're trying to raise money, if you're trying to sell a company, the two things that are going to drive it, the due diligence, are going to be around financials and taxes. And you don't have to be the expert on it, but you need to understand when they start talking about how things go through the income statement and end up on the balance sheet, and vice versa. You need to understand it, because that's where business gets done, is in the
And your
financial
clients are
statements.
going to expect you to understand it.
Yeah. So make sure you have some, at least a pretty solid knowledge of accounting. And then the other thing is, just one of the things I throw out for you guys, if anybody think about going into private practice, or I don't know, you guys haven't decided. Well, anyway, billing this, and I think it was Ed Perry that told me this. So billing is an art, not a science. Everybody thinks it's point one. Every 6 minutes is 0.1, and you just add them all up and you send a client a bill. It is one of those tedious things in the world. And in fact, when I was general counsel at Papa John's, my number one and number two recruiting tools were, number one, you don't have to keep billable time, and two, is free parking. And everybody said, where can I sign up? But sitting there and you get to the end of the day and you're trying to remember, how much time did I spend on this project and how much on that one. But it is not a clock in, clock out kind of a thing. And you need to think about not so much in terms of how much you can build, but how do you help protect and grow your client's business? Because that's really what your job is. Help them figure out where the potholes are, where they can miss the negatives, where they can make sure they're making good decisions. So if they grow, you're going to grow with them. And the other thing is, never ever bill a 0.1 or 0.2. This is my number one. This is maybe my pet peeve. But I'll call up and say, we talked about A, B, and C, right? Yes, I'm going to do a meeting. Just want to confirm I got the information right. And you'll see a bill. Call Chuck Schnatter, 0.1. I'm calling about the same thing we talked about last week. You've already billed me for it. I'm just trying to confirm it. So don't do that. But and the other side of it is, if you're looking to you be in startups or work for startups, you've got to have to take a chance on some people that are not going to make it. And Bill Strench, who I think Bill Strench was in 2 weeks ago.
He was here 2
Remember
weeks
the attorney
ago.
with Frost Brown Tie? He is good at this. He will take a company that is very small, that has sort of a looks like something promising. He'll do a lot of legal work for them, run the bills up. A lot of it he writes off. A lot of it because most of them crash and burn. But he's got some really nice clients out, and they end up either raising money or going and being sold, and he's done quite well with that. But if you're going to do that, you need to think about investing. I call it the rule of 10. A lot of people have their own name for it. But if you invest in 10 startup companies, small companies, 5 of them are going to evaporate. They're just going to go be, within a couple of years, they're just going to be gone. 1 or 2 might do okay, and you hope 2 or 3 of them are the moonshot that make all your money back. And you're going to have the same thing if you take on a lot of small companies as clients. But a great way to get in early, and there's still some banks, accountants, and lawyers that are still doing work for Papa John's, after 30 years here in town. And they don't have to worry about writing off their time now. Another thing I like to talk about is the difference between being an in-house counsel and being outside counsel. If you're in private practice, you've got a lot of clients and you do a little bit for every one of them. So you never really get to know. They show up, they've got one project, you do it, and they go away. And that's fine. That's the way law has been. When you're in-house, it's much nicer because you're usually on the front end. You're involved in the decision making. You know why they're doing what they're doing. Hopefully, if they're smart, they've asked you, your legal advice before they make the decision. And when you're outside, I've seen so many times, you'll have a CEO or COO come up to you and say, "Look, this is what we want to do. It's kind of on the back of a napkin. Just go get it done." And that should scare you because you need more direction than that. So if you got a client like that, and you will find one where there's a founder or CEO who's not real detailed, find somebody else in the company, a CFO, a CEO. We used to call them administrative assistants. I don't know what the people that really run the company day to day that know what the hell's going on. So find one of those people and get all the information, because when you're not inside the company and you don't know who to go to get all the answers, you can really get sideways, and you can be frustrating for you and for the client. And as I said earlier, one of your jobs is really to help add value. How can you add value as a lawyer to a business? That's kind of the bottom line of it. Is your job is to add value just like everybody else. So what I tell you, is make sure you take time up front to get to know your client's business, get to know their key suppliers, their management, their staff. One of the things I was thinking about the other day on this is, and this isn't legal related, but at Heine Brothers we decided to hire an outside marketing firm. And we came to, this is the fee, this is what they're going to do. And they said to me, it was a crazy thing for a start. They said, "When can we go work in a store?" And I said, "What do you mean?" So we got 3 people we want to go work for several hours behind the counter at a Heine Brothers. And I said, "Why?" I said, "Well, we can't market your business if we don't understand your business." Same for a lawyer. You can't help build or protect someone's business if you don't know what the hell they do. So go around, just walk around, see what they're in the manufacturing, see the presses. So when they talk about line 1 goes down, you know exactly what it looks like that they're talking about, what the the issues are. It's just one of the best things you can do. The other thing is find out what their long-term goals are. What keeps the CEO up at night? And that's what you're really trying to solve for here. Somebody's got a business they're trying to grow, and they don't want them to crash and burn. So find out what makes them sweat at night. The other thing that I've seen both as being a part of Greenbaum and being in-house is law firms that are proactive. They'll come to you, they'll say, "Hey, there's been some changes in the labor law or some changes in the SEC law." And they will sit down with your key staff and go through and do sort of a mini seminar with you, or they'll put on a big one and invite you in. The banks did that. A lot of banks do that a lot of times. But that is one of the ways you can really add value, because things are always changing in the law. And when you help your clients stay up with it, they're going to be much more likely to stay with you and call you when things go wrong. And also find out, a lot of times if you develop a practice that has a lot of subject matter expertise, you have a lot of the same clients in the same industry, help spread among your clients sort of what's going on with other companies in the industry. Things like, we never talked about data storage or payment card compliance. I mean, these are all things that have come up, data breaches. These things never used to exist, and they're now big deals that can cause people a lot of problems. So keeping them up to date on this kind of stuff is really crucial. And I think in the next 5 years, we're going to see some major changes on a lot of the sort of social media stuff and what they're doing with everybody's data. I mean, I was talking to a company the other day. We're actually going to use them on my storage company. It's crazy. I mean, it used to be, Papa John's was what I call Generation 1. You gave us, in the 1990s, you would call us, give us your name, your address, your phone number, and what you ordered. That was more information than any restaurant in the country had, and that was the gold standard. Then it got to be, we could maybe get a little information for you on a POS or through a loyalty card, right? Well, now they don't need any of that stuff. There's so much data out there about every one of us in the cloud, wherever it is. They can, in milliseconds, pull all this stuff together, put an ad together, fire it out to every one of you, see which one works, and which doesn't work, they kill it, and they double down on the next one in milliseconds. And I just think sooner or later, Congress is going to start clamping down on that stuff. There's another one where a billboard company, when you drive by with your phone, it registers your phone and ID, and then it'll geo-track you. So let's say you've got a Skyline billboard. You drive past it on I-65, and within 2 days, you go into a Skyline and geo-references and makes a connection. I mean, it just gets crazy stuff.
Yeah.
To prove the efficacy of the advertising.
They don't even have to know your phone. You've got a radio frequency ID or something like that on your phone that they pick up, and that's what they start tracking.
Wow.
It's just kind of, so anyway, those are the kinds of things that are going to change dramatically. So I'm trying to get as much bang for my buck out of it. As I get to know your client, just came up in Skyline. Skyline's got an interesting background. They started off more in a supplier. They made the chili and sold it to these guys, and you could open up, you could call it Skyline Chili if you sold their chili. Well, in the 90s, they went public for a while, which was a complete debacle. But after they regrouped, they had to put together a real franchise agreement. And so
so before those locations, like the one on Bardstown, was just one had nothing to do with, didn't have to pay anything to Skyline except buy the chili.
These goes back to the 50s and 60s.
Okay.
So the Lamborghini family, they would just say chili. So they kind of had sort of a franchise agreement in the early 90s. But in 1999,
well, I remember in 1990, I'd been here a month, and Angela, then Angela, before she married, takes me to that place for lunch. And so in 1990, it would have been non-franchised.
That
right?
probably his first one probably did not have a franchise agreement.
Was that the first one?
In Louisville?
Okay.
And they started in Cincinnati.
Okay.
Yeah. But anyway, so in 1999, they finally put together sort of a franchise agreement, but it was really more of a supply. The franchisees were more worried about the supply than they were the normal franchise. So,
Yeah.
well, they were coming up as a 20-year deal, and they asked me to get involved and help them renegotiate this and try to bring it up to more of a modern standard. Things like, DoorDash and Uber Eats, things that never existed. Some of these, security and data, credit card issues. So they're trying to get that into the agreement. But the fact that I had been on the board for 20 years makes it a whole lot easier when you understand the core of the business to go into and talk to the franchisees about what we need to do to change this agreement.
Mm-hmm.
And so again, just getting to know your clients helps a lot. Let's see, what else we got here? Oh, the other thing is you can do, especially in a big firm, make sure you introduce other members of your firm to your clients. A lot of times, we talk about firms, but people deal with lawyers like their doctor. I mean, you don't go to a practice, you go to a doctor, you go to a lawyer. But I think it's really smart to introduce people, especially like tax, estate planning, succession planning. In fact, I'm convinced that the biggest wave coming through the practice of law is going to be succession planning. There are thousands and thousands and thousands of small businesses that are run by mom and dad, and
They're now ready to retire.
and they're getting ready to retire. Their baby, and I'm at the end of the boomers, so there's people that are 5, 10, 15, 20 years, 15 years ahead of me, and they got all these businesses that are coming up for sale, and they're trying to figure out now what I do because the kids may or may not want to be involved. Even if you give it to the kids, how you do it from a tax perspective.
That could really be a major niche area for one of you guys, or for all
Yeah,
of you guys.
I mean it's going to be huge, and it's a great way to get in to see a lot of cool businesses. And then the other thing is, just you talking about like you moved here 30 years ago. If you can introduce your clients to the people in the community that are doing things, that's a great thing. I went through Leadership Louisville in 2014. I grew up here in Louisville, but actually I grew up in Southern Indiana, but I've lived here most of my life. But when I went to Papa John's, from the time I got there, I was never in Louisville. So I never interacted with many Louisville lawyers. I mean, never in town. I was on a plane. So I went through Leadership Louisville just to get to know my own hometown a little bit better. But it's amazing how many people you get to know and connect with, and that I've followed up with, and have been great business. But anyway, if you can help your clients get to know who the movers and shakers are in this town, especially in government, it can be a real benefit for them. So we talked about taxes. Taxes drive deals. All right, this is another one of my observations over the years. In business law, I've found that there are deal makers and deal breakers. And the deal makers are the ones that say, look, my client has a deal they want to get done. My job is to help them get it done, make sure I give them good advice. But we're going to figure out a way to make things happen. The deal breakers are the ones that's like, well, they're always, no, can't do this, can't do that, it's too risky. A lot of times they're jerks, and that's not what you want to be. And it's just, it doesn't serve your client well. And I promise you, in the legal community, if you are a jerk to enough other lawyers, it will come back and bite you. I promise you. It's a small town. Louisville, we think it's a big city, but it's not. There's a limited number of people here. How you treat other people will come back to haunt you and your client. So make sure that you can be. Your job is to be zealous, right? I mean, we have to be zealously represent our clients and make sure we're looking out for their best interests. But you don't have to be a jerk to do that. And a lot of people think, come out of law school and think, well, I'm just going to be the biggest ass, and that's how I'm going to be tough. And that won't get you anywhere. And it usually ends up, like I say, hurting your client. And then the other side of it that you got to be careful about is the lawyers who are what I call the yes women or the yes men. You know, nobody wants to tell their client no, and so everybody wants to tell them what they think, you know, they want to hear. But that's not our job. Our job is to sit down with them and say, you know, I know you want to do it this way, but we can't. There's a tax issue, or there's a legal issue. We can get there, but we're going to have to redo it. And just you got to walk them through it. You know, hold their hand, and they'll get frustrated, and they'll tell you you're an idiot. And, you know, they'll tell you you're going to get a good lawyer, and you got to just say fine. In fact, one of the things we talk about in retail is sometimes you get a customer that's you know, just either rude, threatening, you know, violent, and sometimes you just have to fire a customer. I mean, right? If somebody's not going to behave, you just got to fire them. Well, it's the same whether you're in selling coffee or if you're a lawyer. I mean, if somebody's, you know, not going to follow your advice and they're doing things that just aren't right, you don't want to be part of that. So sometimes you got to fire the customer. And on that front, one of the things I've noticed with last, and when I started practicing, engagement letters were pretty rare. Really were. You guys know what an engagement letter is? Okay.
Retainer agreement or engagement letter.
Yeah, and you know, there's a lot of stuff you got to do in the practice of law that is non-billable and it's a pain in the ass and nobody wants to do it, but you really get to, this is where it comes covering your ass, CYA. You know, we get a lot of stuff that people think, well, it's been a long-term client, I trust them, I don't have to worry about that. But when things go wrong, trust me, they're gonna look to you and your D&O insurance. I mean, things come around, and when they go bad, everybody gets friendships tend to fall by the wayside. But engagement letter is important. Well, you know, you need to make sure that it fits your practice and it's very specific about what your representation is. Is it a transaction, a lease? And then the other side of this that you really got to be careful about is if you go to XYZ company and they say, look, we've got this building we want to get built and we need some zoning or planning, whatever. They will start referring to you, oh, that's my lawyer, he's my lawyer. Well, that's not, you work for the company, you do not work for the owner of the company unless you have a specific agreement that you're working for them as well.
And this comes up constantly, as I'm not sure I've explained it in this class, but it comes up constantly, and in one case involving one of the large firms recently, I had to be an expert because the CEO continued to guarantee debt and take on debt when his whole board was opposed to it, but they acceded to his request. And in the end, they go under. And the CEO then sues the major firm, with whom the lawyer of that major firm had virtually no contact. He mainly dealt with the CFO. Sued him for a huge malpractice, and a huge malpractice case. Expert witnesses, the whole 9 yards, went on for like 5 years. And the problem that the big firm had was that they didn't have a retainer agreement. And who is your client is looked at not objectively, but subjectively. So it's whatever the reasonable subjective view of the CEO. So you have to settle it. I mean, you can't. It's too big a risk going to trial. So if they had a retainer agreement, they could sell it really quickly.
It gets really messy in family-owned businesses where you've got maybe Sue is the older sister. She kind of runs the place, but there are two other brothers that have an ownership piece, and then you're working for Sue, and then the brothers and they get sideways, which they will in families. It's just, so be very, very careful. That is.
This carries over, especially in a state and airport. So if you're representing a state, you don't want all the heirs thinking you represent them too.
Yes.
Again, you have a conflict.
Yeah. So I think that's
Good point.
Yeah. And it's not just about protecting you. I mean, that way it's very clear to the client what you're there to do. So everybody's clear about what we're here to do. In this game, this is one story I love to tell. I always there were 3 guys that had a little business down in Georgia that they were money managers. It was like a software company, the amount of money they made. Didn't have a lot of top line, but they made a wild amount of money. And they were all two of the guys were getting a little older, so Fred bought out the other 2. They had a look-back agreement. Said that if you sell the company within 18 months, we get a piece of the next sell. So he bought these 2 guys out.
They don't want it flipping.
Yeah, it was basically if in 18 months if you get it, a deal to sell it. Well, about 20 months later, our client, who was a British client, calls up the CEO and says, hey, we'd like to come talk to you. And the 2 things that happened is the CEO immediately called his lawyer and said, hey, I just got a call from these British guys. What should I do? and they documented the hell out of exactly what day it was that the British client had called them. It was 2 months after the 18-month window before they got their first call. And so, of course, the deal goes through, we close it. I got my deposition taken, everybody, because these two partners came back and said, oh, you screwed us out of our second bite at the apple. And the case got dismissed because they were very clear about, everybody having the same date. The CEO of our client said, no. I picked up the phone and called Fred on this date. Fred had it in his notes. His lawyer buttoned up and
And they
said,
couldn't refuse
as
it.
of our, sent him a letter, said, if you want to proceed, these are the terms, you'll have to sign an NDA and all that. So anyway, that's just one of those things where everybody came out okay because they had buttoned it up. On the other side of that, I'll tell you, we had one where we sold a shopping center one time, and the lawyer that represented the buyers, they put money in his escrow account. He lost some of the documents, and he was 24 hours late. He was more than a day and a half late in wiring the money for the closing. That's the kind of stuff that really gets you in trouble. You got money in your escrow account that's supposed to go to a closing, and everybody's running around trying to figure out where it went, and we thought, oh shit, this guy took off. And it was, he was just sloppy. So anyway, the other side of this goes kind of related. If you're a business lawyer, at some point you will have an opportunity to invest either in your client or with your client. And a lot of guys, Ed Glasscock's done this for years, or a lot of lawyers have done this and had a lot of success. But this is where you really need to be careful. You need to make sure you follow the ethic rules on that one. Make sure if you're in a firm, check with, make sure your partners are good with it. Make sure you're very clear with the client exactly that this is a separate business relationship, because those can get real messy as well.
And you need a document signed by the client.
Yeah.
And after advising the client to get separate legal help with regard to that. This also comes up.
It comes up a lot. Yeah. So just make
It's
sure
fun to do. As long as you're interested
Yeah.
aligned with your clients, which they usually are, which is to maximize your client's success, even more so if you own equity in that client. It normally does not go sideways. The ones I got involved with went beautifully, and it even deepened my relationship with the clients.
Well, even the ones that go
It's a lot of
sideways, the
fun.
business may not make it, but if
Right.
everybody understands that
You're still deepening it.
we're just all everybody putting our money in, and then we're all
Sure.
taking the risk.
Yeah.
But I suggest only do it with somebody you really know
You
well
really
and that
trust.
you trust. Yeah, that's and then the last thing I have to kind of touch on, because I have so many people in your class I think have talked about actually starting their own business.
Yeah.
True entrepreneurs, and that's sort of I think you're going to talk about this, but in the Louisville market in terms of raising money, it is a very interesting market in my opinion, because it seems like there are a lot of great little companies, a lot of people with great ideas, some passionate founders, and they all seem to be able to raise the first 300, maybe 700, maybe even $1 million. And about the time they get to where they kind of got a business that's looking like something that's real and it's interesting, and they need the next $2 to $5 million, you just can't find it in this town. It's the damnedest thing. I've told the mayor and everybody else that I'm gonna start a fund to call it move out of town. So you take all these great little companies like Beam Industries, they got bought up and moved them to Columbus, Ohio, and I think they just got sold again for a great premium. But we got to figure out in this town how to get sort of this second round of funding, because once you get to $3 to $5 million in revenue, depending on what your industry is.
What's your explanation for that?
Well, Louisville is a brick and mortar town. If you look around, if you want to build, I know a guy who's a developer, very successful guy. He is building a 950,000 square foot spec warehouse. The banks are happy to finance it. He hasn't done it for anybody to be. And if you want to build a distillery, somebody said there was
30 or something, right?
No, there have been there was one major distillery built between like 1945 and 2000, and since 2000 there have been 200 distilleries built. Restaurants. If I had restaurants, craziest, one of the hardest businesses in the world. You can always find money. This Biscuit Belly thing. I got guys calling me from both coasts. Hey, I want to get involved. I got some money. I'll send it to you. I said, no, I don't need money for Biscuit Belly. That's doing fine. I got this company called Ready App, which is killing it. What's Ready App? Well, they got Tesla. They got Hard Rock Casino. They got GE. They got Bechtel, which Bechtel's the biggest construction. All these people using this product around the world. So if there's money in that, well, I don't know, the technology stuff, I don't get it. I got it. So it's a brick and mortar town. So if you're a startup, you're not doing, something that they can see and take their friends to. I don't know. It's crazy.
Yeah.
So anyway, I think, anybody, if you do start, and the other thing I think about this, Manning, is there's not been any real big liquidity events in this town. There's been no companies like, if you went for a while, you had, Humana went public, and that spun off a bunch of stuff. And you had, Brown-Forman's been, just the dividends is great. Papa John's, Texas Roadhouse. But all seems kind of stopped. Like the people that, put money in these things, I think there are a lot of angel investors here locally. They got a couple $100,000 in 20 deals, but none of them are being sold.
Well, some did. I mean, Genscape did.
Genscape's a recent one, yeah.
And another one is Roadmap. I don't know if you heard of that.
No, I didn't hear about that
We talked about that over there. It was basically they needed $1 million to fund, and they were a couple of Humana employees that got laid off. Both had, degrees in data analysis from MIT. And so a guy you may know, we'll talk about later, said, I'll help you get financed. And he went to, 8 or 9 people he knew. And 5 years later, they sell to Cotivity, which is a publicly held company, for $100 million. So those things happen.
We need some more of those, though.
We need a lot of those.
Yeah.
And of course, there's some whiskey businesses that are being financed.
Yeah.
Maybe they're like, I think, what's the other one that really had the big deal was Angel's Envy. They were sold to Bacardi.
Yeah, Bacardi, and then you had, Rabbit Hole
And
sold.
Rabbit Hole, I had a chance to invest in. You didn't. But that one did really well.
Yeah.
Who would have thought a
And then what was it,
psychologist could launch a successful
Kentucky
whiskey
Owl was-
company? Huh?
The Kentucky Owl was the craziest thing ever. I mean, they
Yeah.
didn't even have a company. They sold that thing for a lot of money.
So,
That's all I had.
Is Cincinnati a lot better?
Cincinnati's a lot
Capital
better.
market? Okay.
Cincinnati is better, and I think
Indy, I know,
Indianapolis
is
better.
good, yeah. Nashville?
I think Nashville's much better, yeah.
Because when I practiced in Birmingham, I found Birmingham fairly weak. I found more venture capital activity here than I experienced when I lived in Birmingham.
Yeah, I don't know how big is Birmingham relative?
They're all
About the same?
$1.1 million, $1.2 million SMSAs,
Yeah.
something like that.
Yeah. Well, that's all I have. You guys any questions, anything else you want to talk about? I'm open.
You said accounting is really important. But you don't want to get like a major or minor in it. I've seen some attorneys have like a certificate that you can get through like university and certificates basically give you like the basic understanding
Mhm.
of whatever it is. Do you think that would be a good idea, or alternatively, how do you learn that stuff if you don't do it through school?
Well, I mean, there's probably these days, a lot of this stuff is online. You can probably take some online classes that'll get you. I think a certificate would be a great idea. When I was an undergraduate, I started down the path of being an accounting major. So I was 2 years in when I realized I didn't want to be an accounting major. But I had
But you got the base.
I had, I guess at that point, three or four accounting classes, and then I took a couple tax classes here, which I think so. It gave me a pretty good foundation. And then I was lucky when I went to Greenbaum, because it's a pretty big firm. There's a guy named Ed Perry there who I just think the world of. I mean, most first year associates at Greenbaum spend a lot of time in the library. I was on a plane flying around going to Tampa, New York, and he would sit there and explain. We would walk through the deal and.
What a great mentor is that.
Yeah, he was a great mentor. So that sort of pulled it all together. Actually, doing the deals and looking at the stuff in real time.
But I think, I had an accounting 101 course in undergrad, and that helped a lot. But then I actually worked with people who are in deals like this. You learn a lot working on deals.
Yeah.
But anything so that you develop, a basic comfort. I mean, you can read my son read Accounting for Dummies, and that was enormously helpful to him, because
Yeah.
now he could discuss finance with his boss, who was trying to capitalize his own company not long ago.
Yeah, and you don't have to understand all the FASB rules and
Yeah.
all. I mean, it's just basically,
The general
how
understanding.
does, where does the cash come in? Where are the expense lines? How they come out the bottom? How does that feed over to the balance sheet? It's just that kind of stuff.
And if you can, you should take corporate tax. I know it's late in the game for many of you, but
Yeah.
corporate tax was really one of the more helpful courses.
Yeah, I would
had in
agree with
law
that.
school.
Yeah, corporate tax is good.
And I found it easier than basic income tax. I didn't find it that complex. It probably can be, but I didn't get that far.
Well,
It was
yeah,
really
it's
complex.
like
I bring
anything
in
else.
the accountants.
As long as you got the basic principles. I mean, that's the nice thing about, accounting, the principles are the principles. It just,
Yeah.
for some reason, the International Accounting Board likes to change crazy rules sometimes. They just have to make themselves relevant.
Any other questions, class? Yeah.
Without kind of well, I'll be talking about it a little bit, but for angel investors or people that are looking to get into angel investing, let's say us 10 years down the line when we've made status of accredited investor or what have you, how do you start to build the portfolio from zero businesses or zero ownership interests into 10 for the standard portfolio?
Well, there's several groups. There's like, venture connectors. There's what's the other one called? It's one they do on Monday morning. But there are a lot of little organizations, groups around town that put on sort of like what's the Shark Tank kind of thing. There's some people that have just people that are coming to presentations, make a 20-second or 22-minute pitch for their business. And then the other thing is just find the people that are doing it, because there's a limited number of people, and just tell them you're interested. Because once people find out that you're interested in talking to them about putting money in startups or smaller businesses, your phone will stop ringing. You'll start getting texts and emails saying, "Hey, can I have coffee with you?" And then my advice is, somebody's going to come to you and say, "I got this really great idea. I'm going to put a second mortgage on my car, and in 12 months, I'm going to sell it for $1 trillion. Run like hell." What you want is somebody that is like, they're talking about their product or their service, and they're so damn jazzed, their head's going to explode. They just love everything about it. And you call them on Wednesday night at 9 o'clock, and they're talking about it. You call them on Sunday morning at 9 o'clock, and they're talking about it. That's what you want. You want that passionate founder who's really going to work 7 days a week, no matter what. Just needs. They're the kind of people give them a little money, and it's like, it's like feeding the.
Sort of the way the Genscape guy is, Sean over there.
Sean, yeah, Sean's like that, yeah, and yeah.
But it's also part of networking, right? The more you get out and get involved in your community, the more people you're going to meet. And if somebody happens to be an entrepreneur, you run into them, get to know them better, have coffee and drinks. And at some point, if you even know one or two entrepreneurs, they're going to keep their ear to the ground as to what's going on as a rule. And
Yeah.
you'll get to know more. And it sort of will.
Business First had a breakfast the other morning that had, some different people that are involved in the sort of the startup ecosystem. And there was a woman that had been with a SaaS company that actually started here, ended up moving their headquarters to New York. So I just went up there after the presentation and said, "Hey, I'm on a company called Ready App. We're a SaaS-based business. We're here in Louisville, doing a lot of great things going on, but we're looking to try to really ramp it up." And so I gave her a card, and she sent me an email yesterday. So I'll web coffee with her, and so that whoever she and I'll talk about who we're talking about. And so once you get to know these people, you sit down and they'll say, like you just said on this what's it called, the app that
Roadmap?
Roadmap. I'll say, "Hey, I've got this deal I'm looking at for X, Y, and Z." And say, "Oh, just got a roadmap." So,
Well, how that happened was, I'm not going to name too many names, but I had done Tom Cottingham did his deal, Tech Republic. I don't know if you remember that. And it was a fairly successful startup. He did it with, I'm trying to remember, he did it with Doug Cobb.
Okay.
So Doug Cobb and Tom Cottingham did that together. And then Cottingham did another deal, which I did get involved with, but it didn't make a lot of money, but it made a little bit of money. And before I could spend a little bit of money, one of the investors in that called, who is a former VC guy from New York who moved back here to raise his kids. He calls and says, "Well, before you spend that money, I want a little bit of that money for these two guys that work for Humana. And you might well lose it, but you're not going to feel it. It's house money, right?"
Yeah.
Here, damn it, take it.
Yeah.
So a lot of things are just, once you get in one or two deals, they will multiply. They'll start meeting other investors and get to know them, show up.
Yeah.
Other questions?
I'll probably ask for your input throughout my presentation, if that's okay with you.
Yeah, so I'm here. Anything I can do to help you? All right.
All right, thanks.
So what is an angel investment? Essentially, it's an investment made by usually a wealthy individual, usually before a business has really had a chance to develop itself or kind of make its own way in the world. And an angel investment is usually the primary source of funding for those startup companies. The investment will usually take place as a seed investment or before any sort of venture capital fund is available. They're typically classified as more risky investments, as numbers vary, but it's typically, I think, 1/3 or so are basically looking at going to fail. And so if you're going to become an angel investor, as we were talking about a few minutes ago, you'll typically have a portfolio of about 10 different companies where you have an equity interest that you've put in money, you're putting in your connections, your time, to try and help that business grow, and also to secure your own portfolio and your own financial security in hopes that one of them, or more of them, end up becoming some of the larger payout of 30 times the initial investment value and returns. So angel investments are incredibly common. They're not some rare entity or like offshoot that doesn't exist except in large cities. Almost every company will start with small family funding, and that can be up to the initial $100,000, where you have a relative or friend that really believe in who you are, and if they want to see you succeed, so they lend you money, and then you start getting introduced to angels and the people that can come in and help push the company into kind of fruition. And it's estimated that $25 billion in 70,000 companies are invested in 70,000 companies each year. The angels are everybody that, well, they're, again, more common than you'd think. They're friends, they're family. Most are SEC 501 section Regulation D accredited investors, which again, that's $1 million in net assets or net worth or joint net worth of exceeding $1 million at the time of the purchase, whereas assets under management of $1 million or above, excluding the value of the individual's primary residence. So you can't just put your house on the market and suddenly you're good to go as an accredited investor. And just generally speaking, as an angel, you would not want to put your entire nest egg into a single investment anyway. So there's section 501D of Regulation D it's eight subparts, pretty complex, has its nuances. As an attorney for an angel investor or a company, it's your job to make sure that those investors are in fact accredited and meet all of the requirements set forth in that section. There are exceptions, I believe, for close family members. And I think somebody can be considered an angel investor if they've donated $50,000 to $60,000 if they fit within the very close family class. But I'm not exactly sure where that is legally, or if that's even a legal definition at that point, or if it's just more of a by popular demand, this person's now an angel investor for the purposes of that business. This is unfortunately really hard to read, so basically angel investors are incredibly diverse groups of people. 30% of angels are women, as opposed to venture capital where you have 90% are men. So you have a better chance at being able to see a diverse class of people that you fit better with your company or your company's ideals. So it's more attractive to people that, let's say, they're in an incredibly niche market where they're bringing in, I don't know, jewelry to Chinese or Chinese jewelry for Chinese Americans who are, and you're looking for investors who are also along the same line of trying to meet that market where the market is, rather than trying to bring in a tech company guru who's going to suddenly say you need to have X amount of research and development money and tell your company to go in a direction you don't want it to go. In general, about 60% of angels are entrepreneurs, and they will take advisory roles. Usually those that take advisory roles also have an entrepreneurial background. So if you're looking for an angel investor, if you want a bigger check, go to those that also had, or try to find angel investors who had an entrepreneurial background themselves. And 73% of angel investors reported education beyond a bachelor's degree, and more than half had an MBA or other business education as well. So we're not looking at an uneducated pool of investors typically, although there is instances of what some people refer to as dumb versus smart money, where you have the family who made a lot of money, got lucky winning the lottery somehow, want to give to their family member or close friend a lot of money with zero background in whatever that person's looking for. That would be considered dumb money. And typically, as another investor going into that, you'd be a little bit worried when there isn't that support beyond the money. Angel groups in general are growing. In the early 2000s, they started to take off. Initially, angels were individuals. They weren't backed by larger networks, where it was just word of mouth. You got to know one person who knew another person. Now there are online forums to kind of group angels or connect angels to each other, and also to connect business owners to these angels. So there is ways that you as an attorney can help your client or kind of find angels if you're trying to get them in the direction of pushing their business towards angel investment groups. The Angel Capital Association is a super helpful resource, and they have a directory of all of their known angels or angels who are happy to kind of help point people in directions and act as advisors, who may not necessarily want to be an angel for your company itself, but might know somebody who would. There are some fees associated with angel groups, or some angel groups. About 30% of them require an application fee for a business owner to kind of come before almost a Shark Tank-like panel to pitch their business and try to get the angel investors interested. And then that presentation is also kind of a nominal fee. It's like $30 to $500 typically to be able to go in front of one of those panels through the ones that charge money. So when do angel investments occur? I've been talking about kind of early stages of a startup's life. That's when angels are super important. That's where they get their value back, is they're getting in the business really early on. So they're providing connections for kind of how to drive the business forward, how to grow the business beyond what its current state is, and it's trying to get it to the point where other investors, such as venture capitalists or or before it might even go public or be driven by group funding, angel investments occur kind of at the onset of the company or very early on. The stages of investing generally, this is not by any means like a hard and set rule. Some people start or have different names for the different stages of investing. But initially there's a startup where you have usually low cost covered by the family. Ideally, your client's going to be seeking an attorney at that point to see how they're going to progress forward. Then there's the seed capital stage, which is the first stage in venture capital financing. To some venture capitalists, some would say it starts at the early stage, but it enables product development, market research, building a management team, and the development of a business plan. Then you hit early stage investment. That's where you start to see your first customers if you're a customer-based company. And at that point, many companies will have already existed for about 3 years before they even see the first customers come in. At the growth stage, a company will begin to become kind of an established player. They'll be seeking funding for new facilities, maybe research and development, product improvements, and marketing. At the mezzanine stage is the financing step. It's used to bridge the gap between company expansion and having the company file for an initial public offering. And then in the late stages, that's usually made available right before the IPO or right after. The companies that are at that stage are typically those which have been seeing lots of revenue growth, but maybe not necessarily a huge amount of profit, or if any profit. And then finally get to private equity stages, where you use to invest in companies who have already achieved huge amounts of high valuations, or are just looking to facilitate buyouts and grow leverage for those buyouts, or assist in management takeovers and things like that. So it's investing in the Googles, Papa John's, the Heine brothers, those that are kind of out there already doing well for themselves. So how much is an angel investment? There's obviously the $1 million investor requirement, but each individual investment can range and vary depending on what the company needs at the time, and what the angel is willing to give. But the average investment is for an individual angel is about $25,000 to $100,000, and it's that amount of money from their own pocket. So unlike a venture capitalist, where they're not spending any of their own money and the fund is taking care of who they choose to invest in, the angel is investing their own money, their own time, all their own expertise, and so they're taking a little bit of a larger risk, and if the company fails, they're losing that money. And of course, the investments are made for equity shares in the company, and the amount of money generally determines and the valuation of that company generally determines what equity share they're going to be asking for, or the company is going to be willing to give them. Got a short clip here that shows kind of the valuation, and kind of how crazy some of these valuations are at the early stage, where there isn't enough information or hasn't been enough time for the business to develop and actually give a solid valuation.
Next into the tank is a high-tech version of a travel necessity.
Hola Sharks, I'm Gaston Blanchet from Argentina, and this is my best friend Jesse Potash from New York.
Our company is Trunkster, and we're seeking $1.4 million in exchange for 5%.
Wow. Sharks, meet Trunkster, the world's first and only roll-top suitcase.
Trunkster's minimalist roll-top door provides instant access to your belongings. Whether in the back of a taxi or at the check-in counter, you're just a quick slide away from your passport book or sweater.
And that's just the beginning. Trunkster is loaded with smart features. We've engineered the world's first self-contained handle scale, so you can pack just under the weight limit and avoid costly fees.
Sharks, is there anything worse than running out of power on the go? With Trunkster, you've got juice all to yourself via the built-in USB ports powered by a removable battery.
And forget about lost luggage nightmares, because Trunkster offers global location tracking with proximity sensors.
Trunkster gives you all of this, plus it's made from the highest quality materials using a patent-pending assembly process for lightweight and rigid durability.
Not to mention how sexy it is.
This is the biggest luggage innovation since wheels were added 50 years ago, and we need your help to establish ourselves as the game-changing luggage brand worldwide.
So, who's in?
You gonna show us the product? Let me see
Just
it.
to preface the inside.
How do you open it?
Oh, you can just press this
pull
button
it out
very
there,
quickly
and
and
you
just
open
slide
it.
down.
You can open it standing up or laying down. That's the beauty of it.
How much that weighs? I just want to.
My January 1st was May 1st.
Just want to pull it out.
Yeah, and just so you know, they'll weigh less than 8 pounds when they're
The
finished.
wheels are great.
Thanks.
So how'd you come up with this idea?
I was in a luggage store and I realized, like, wow, every luggage brand is the same. As a millennial, like, I like to buy a brand that has a story behind it that comes from grassroots travelers. There's no brand like this in the luggage
So
market.
corporate.
You're such millennials.
Yeah.
You are. You're right. Oh my God, it's so corporate.
No, but really, but
Well, it's boring.
It's about to get corporate. 1.4 million for 5%. Which one of you do I absolutely tear to pieces now on a $28 million valuation?
All right, I'll take the pain first. Here you go.
Are you not selling this yet?
We are pre-selling it.
So, that's basically, we hear about a $28 million valuation. So, I think we'll hear later in the semester how a valuation is actually calculated, but essentially 1.4 million for 5%. You're assuming that they're estimating the value to be, well, that 1.4 is 5%, so the calculated total is then 28 million. Obviously, or well, later on, Robert says he thinks the company is worth maybe 5 million at this point because they hadn't actually taken the product to any customers. It hadn't even finished development at that point. And it hadn't really shown anything except for the idea. Robert later offers a 1.4 million, so the amount of money they were asking for 30% ownership equity in the company. And that deal eventually fell through because they never took the product to any of their crowdfunding customers. So product fell through, everyone pulled out, and everyone hightailed and ran. It was considered one of the biggest failures of Shark Tank as kind of like.
So which Shark Tank guy invested 1.4?
Robert, the one older, well, he said he would invest 1.4, but didn't.
He didn't invest.
So they went to a deal closing after that. The way Shark Tank works is they do a televised bit and everybody gets to see
Right. And
the
then there's
product.
a closing.
There's a closing that happens behind or off camera, and I think maybe 10% of them actually go through, and they all get tweaked, and all the minute language and the deals and everything else are all fleshed out.
Only 10% go through?
That's what I had seen on kind of their blog about the realities of Shark Tank.
And this is one that didn't, so none of the Shark Tank guys lost any money.
Right. This went completely belly up. But they did have, or Trunkster did have, I think it was $1.4, $1.5 million in crowdfunding, just people pouring in money, and through basically like the GoFundMe type investments, and all of those people lost their money, and they haven't been able to find the owner or the two guys that were on the show, or anybody else who had an ownership interest at that point in what existed as Trunkster. So it's kind of been seen as a huge scam at this point, and it kind of shows here's an angel investment that really was like red flags all over the place. They had a great idea, maybe could have had it actually come to fruition, upset a huge market, which is what you're looking for, in being able to take the product to a bunch of different markets, even if it's only one product. But yeah, didn't work out so well because the valuations can be all over the place at this point. So venture capital investments are kind of the next stage after an angel investment, and it's helpful to compare because venture capital investments typically only come out of California, New York, and Boston markets. Those are the US big hubs for venture capital, and if you're here in Louisville, you're not in one of the big three markets, angel investors are going to carry you through where venture capitalist investment might take you beyond that, or I guess maybe not carry you through if the Louisville market's dead ending at the 1 million to 1.5 million tasks. Again, angels are more diverse in terms of economically, geographically, generally speaking, than venture capitalist groups. The people that you can get to interact with as a business owner aren't necessarily just representing corporate interests. They can be people from your closer friends, family, etc. So venture capitalists don't really step in until after the seed funding. So you start seeing a longer period of time that the company has to be able to survive on its own and grow itself before venture capitalists will get even knowledge that the company is this up and coming business and disrupting another industry. Again, angel investments are made by the individual, and it's the individual's money, rather than just having a big fund that gives up X amount of dollars in hopes that they're going to have a more solid return. And the investors themselves have to have more knowledge of, well, to be successful, need to have more knowledge of the company if they're an angel investor than if they were a venture capitalist who had money in a big venture capital fund. The average return, or the return expectations, I guess, so not necessarily an actual return, for angel investors is a little bit less than a venture capitalist, but the amounts of money that they're investing is almost 1-to-1 in terms of equity, so they're getting more back than a venture capitalist would be getting because the venture capitalist is going to a fund and paying out multiple people. So if I'm a business owner, or I'm advising a business owner, how do I attract angels? First off, be very frank with the angels and the people you're connecting with about what your aspirations are, what the business owner's aspirations are. You don't want to be predicated on a whole bunch of fabrications or any sort of, you don't want misunderstandings to occur, basically. You want everyone to be on the same page the whole way through, because in order for an angel investor who's bringing guidance and monitoring and mentoring, they need to know what the real situation is. They need to know how best to advise. So if you're not telling them the truth, they can't advise you properly. As the business owner, as well as the attorney, you want to be making sure these investors are on the same page as the business owner. You want them to be kind of hand in hand as they develop the company and make sure that they all fit in the same style. You don't want one of the owners or an investor to be ready to pull out before it goes comes to fruition, so that they can, quickly sell the company, recoup their losses, and get out. You want everybody to try to give it their all in making that company grow. And you also have to decide how hands-on that angel is going to be in the company. If you're already doing pretty well, you're comfortable in your set of mentors, or you know how to develop your company, this is your 5 millionth startup and they've all been successful, you may not want an angel investor who's going to want to be completely hands-on, take over the ship and start steering you in a different direction. So you need to know and be very clear about where and what you want the angel investor to be doing for the company. Okay, so if I'm an angel, what type of company should I be looking for? Well, first off, more than one. Again, you want to be looking for a portfolio. Average is about 10. Some of the more experienced investors will be going for a few more, but you're also worried about kind of spreading yourself too thin at a certain point, because if you're putting all your time into one company, the others might fall behind or lose your attention, and suddenly something happens to one of those companies that you could have helped to steer in a different direction. And that's actually one question I had for you, is how to kind of manage the multiple companies that you have an interest in, and how to stay on top of the different aspects that they might run into.
Well, as you were saying, a lot of times if you invest in a company, they'll ask you to be an advisor or maybe even sit on the board, so you're gonna have some regular contact with them. But it just takes, just like, I'll pick up the phone and call them. What's going on today? We're talking to XYZ, did you get that deal closed? Where is that? So it's just like any other communication, but and some are better than others. And of course, it's also dependent on how much you want to be involved. A lot of people just like to, look at the information, put their money in, and go play golf. Tell me when you sell it, or I can write it off.
When you're looking at setting up another investment, are you considering kind of how much time they're asking versus how much time you have to give at a certain point, or?
There's two things that are guaranteed once you get involved. They're going to need more money than they tell you, and they're going to need more time than they tell you. Because if they come in, they're going to have a plan that says we can raise $500,000, and then we're going to be cash flow positive, we're going to grow. It's going to take them longer to get there, so they're going to need more money and they're going to need more time. And raising money is very time consuming.
Would you say that you would advise as an attorney any clients who are potentially angels or business owners to kind of take into consideration maybe leeway on estimates of time and money, or is that something that everyone should kind of understand? Is that kind of taken for granted?
I'm not sure I understand.
Is that something that you would specifically advise as an attorney for one of your clients in terms of like balancing portfolios and things like that, or would you expect that the client would know where their limits should be?
Yeah, I think that's a client's. I don't think that's a lawyer's job to figure out what companies you invest in, how much time or money you're going to put in. I think that's just an investment decision.
But if the lawyer is representing the issuer, obviously, there's going to be disclosure regarding that, because it's basically soft information while you're trying to project what the company might do. And so there's standard disclaimer language that you make sure every potential investor has.
So again, portfolio of investments, and you want to make sure that you're ready to take or lose whatever you're putting in. You have to be ready for the company that is one of your 10 to fail, and that money is then gone. You might recoup some of it in tax write-offs, but aside from that, you're not making much back, or any back. So as a potential angel investor, where would I find opportunities to invest? Well, friends and family, knowing your community, networking within your community is huge. Other investors are connected to each other, and if you're breaking into the industry, you really want to just network as hard as you can, and make sure that the people that you're talking to can point you in the right direction, not the wrong direction. So character checks and kind of reality checks as you're going along. I think a safe way and a developing way recently has just been using the internet and getting involved in angel groups and networking in kind of the 21st century. So how long before I see a return on the investment? On average, 11% of the angel's portfolio will yield a positive exit, but typically the positive exits are occurring later down the line after about 5 years. Most businesses that fail within the first 3. So in balancing your portfolio, you'll want to transition your losses from some companies, we'll get to it in a minute, but using tax rollover exemptions into other companies, so you're maintaining your portfolio size. And you'll want to hold on to the ones that are profitable, and typically you'll be tied in through investment equity, vested equity interests, which will hold you as an investor in the company for a period of usually about 5 years, just to make sure that everyone is within the company, stays within the company through its growth stages. The average return for those successful positive exits will result in about a 75% chance of a 2.6 times return on their initial investment. So if I invested $100,000, 5 years later, I could potentially get back $260,000.
Did you calculate, I'm not a mathematician, I'm not gonna try to do this in my head, but if you hold at least 5 and you have a 75% chance of a 260% return, so a little better than double your money, what is that annual rate of return, assuming that happens? It's not much. Is it considering compounding? It's gonna be less than 10%.
Yeah, let's see, if you could, 160.
What I think the number, so this was pulled from people that, an ACA study in 2017, and what I think it's not really demonstrating is that certain investments usually worth more, or you put in more money on the onset, and then
This is just a lot of data that got crunched, and this is what comes
This is
out at
just
the end.
the
Yeah,
pure
which is still
raw
pretty
average.
interesting. You a 75% chance of a 2.6 return.
I think this data would suggest
Fairly low rate of return for the risk you're taking.
Right, but there are usually 1 in 10 will result in a 17 times your investment, and you're hoping that that one or the combination of 2 or 3 that have a 6 times return investment will recoup the losses of the ones that completely fail, which bring that average down to 2.6. And if you've invested more money into the one that ends up coming out as one of the big winners when it goes public or when it sells or at the exit, then you can end up making 7-8 times your total investment over the portfolio. So that's when that's when angel investing becomes much more profitable, and that's kind of, I think, the goal of most angels is to hit the big winner and ride out the losses throughout that period. Because it is a long time too. You have to be able to set that money in, or send the money off and hope that it comes back, essentially. I don't know if that lines
Good
up.
explanation.
And all right. So, as an attorney, and I'm facilitating an angel investment, what do I need to know and who do I need to tell you what? Make sure there's a solid exit strategy where everyone gets out at the same time. A lot of investors or future investors beyond the initial angel investment might be a little bit worried if you see an angel investor who wants to get out in 2 years with X amount of dollars returned back to them so that they guarantee a return. It's not super common, but for a lot of investors, for just business in general, if you have people getting out earlier than others, it tends to look like a pyramid scheme. And then you want to ideally require an employment contract of the owners of the company, as well as founders, to make sure that they stay with the company at least until it's more solid further down the line. You could do that with like a 5-year employment contract, or something that allows the other owners to buy back the equity if the owner or founder decides to desert the company, because it really hurts the company when a founding member decides to take off. It shows instability and generally can hurt the company pretty badly. On the client side, for any client you want to make sure that everyone's doing their due diligence, you're doing your due diligence, and making sure that all the investors are in fact accredited, or again, I'm not exactly sure where to look for the family exception, but I think that for smaller amounts of money at the very early onset.
I don't know about that.
couldn't find anything.
Yeah,
But
I think that might be one of the problems in the research. There's no small family exemption for credit investment.
well, right, you wouldn't be accredited, but you could still be considered an angel investor is what I was reading.
Oh, an angel investor.
So I don't think that really matters too much, but it was just a weird little caveat that was put into everything.
On your
that we
first
did.
bullet, typically, I'm not sure I can say this, typically, if I'm a big investor in a deal, I'm gonna insist on tag-along rights. I don't wanna be left as a minority shareholder in a business owned by somebody I don't even know.
Can you kind of explain the tag along, right?
It's just negotiation where, your subscription carries with it. In other words, one of the nature of there's a corporation has a contract with you that if shares are acquired, that by a majority, it triggers a requirement that all shares be purchased. There are various places you can put it. You can put it in a stock purchase agreement, you can put it in a subscription agreement, you can put it in the articles of bylaws. But just basically there's, and sometimes when there's a buyer of a company, the buyer's going to insist on drag-along rights, which is a little bit different. There you're forcing all the minority shareholders of the target to sell, or there's no deal. So that would be in the stock acquisition agreement.
Okay. And that would occur with the angel investors too?
Investors, before you part with your money, can say, I'm not investing unless I have tag-along rights. I don't want to be stranded later.
You'll also be hosting initial public offerings, and that happens a little bit later, but it's important to comply with the notice requirements of 506B and C and D, I believe. Could be
Or for an IPO?
or for an IPO, yeah. I didn't go too far into that because I was just kind of a general due diligence.
Well, then you have due diligence on steroids when you go with the IPO. But one of the things that it was the trickiest for me in taking several companies public was they start out very closely held, often by people who don't cross T's and dot I's. And you've got to relocate minutes, you've got to reconstruct minutes. Most importantly, the hardest part was to reconstruct from lousily kept share book registers how the stock that is outstanding got to be outstanding without violating registration requirements. And so you're going to have to delineate in part 2 of the registration statement for the SEC. It's not something that goes to the investor. The SEC wants to go over this with a fine-tooth comb. How did every share from the moment of incorporation become outstanding prior to your IPO? And what was the exemption? So that was pretty tricky. So you got to keep good records before you get the IPO stage.
Another thing that you'll want to advise the clients is to be careful about tracking IP ownership. If it's any sort of technology or anything, or even trademark ownership and all of that stuff. If you have a founder who has written somewhere that, or they're the ones that filed under their name instead of the company's name, an ownership claim for a trademark, you want to make sure that everyone knows who owns what. And when you're giving employment contracts to employees to the company, you want to make sure that IP rights are retained by the company. If it's done on the company's dime, especially for when it comes to attracting more investors, you really want to just have that box checked. You don't want to have floating IP ownership rights that could result in having to pay another company or a research institute more money later.
So as an attorney actually working for the issuer, you're on every one of these deals, even if you're not preparing a disclosure document, you got to provide access to these accredited investors. And in doing that, you're going to need to do due diligence. In other words, you can't, as much as you think you trust your client, you still have to go underneath the deal. If you're doing an offering on horse breeding or cattle breeding or whatever it is, you visit the ranch. You make sure everything appears to you to be copacetic, or it will come back and burn you. So you have to do the due diligence. It's not as extensive as it would be on an IPO. but you still have to do your due diligence, and their checklist for this, it has to be done. That's a standard of practice for securities law.
Speaking of securities law, and also keeping up with the changes to securities law is crucial to making sure that everybody stays on the same page and there's no surprises that catches your company off guard as you're moving forward and looking towards IPOs and eventually exit strategies. It's also a good idea to have vesting interests for equity owners. So essentially releasing the equity or releasing the equity interest and money over time rather than an upfront allocation of the percent or the amount of money that's used to spend the money or to buy the equity interest in order to ensure that people do stay with the company and stay longer. So there's a couple tax implications of angel investing that really protect people that are angel investors as well as the companies and partners in like entrepreneurial ventures. Section 1202 of the IRC provides a tax-free gains on 100% of gains related to startup investments up to $10 million per investment. So essentially, that's the government incentivizing people to invest in small businesses and to help small businesses make it in the market. Founders, employees, angel investors, fund general partners, and taxable limited partners are all eligible for this tax break. So if you're representing a client who is any of those, you should be letting them know about 1202, and if you are not a tax attorney, get a tax attorney and let them know they should be filing under 1202 to get this exception because it is millions of dollars in tax write-offs.
Austin, I want to interrupt you just for a minute. I cannot underscore the significance of 1202. And what I don't understand, maybe you can shed some light on this. You're more businessman now than a lawyer, but why would you ever choose an LLC if the corporate form, as a practical matter, is almost as flexible, but you get this 1202?
Well, I think a lot of people, and this almost never comes up in small company investing, but a lot of the private equity guys are saying, we're not going to talk to you unless you convert to a Delaware C Corp.
Right.
So if you're going to get the private equity money down the road, you're going to have to be there.
Yeah.
So it probably makes sense to go ahead and start there.
So when Roadmap was being put together, it was decided that, well, we're not forming as an LLC. We're going to put them together as a corporation from day one. So they sold 5 years and 2 weeks, after formation, which was just, it's one of those. I mean, presumably, if you were doing Heine Brothers as a C Corp, and you've been in it longer than 5 years, and if it's under the the company has to be less than 100 million in value. What's their 50?
The company has to have less than $5 million in revenue. At purchase, the company must have been worth less than $50 million at sale.
Is what I remember.
Or at sale, that would be fine. So if you bought it and it was under 50 million, let's say it was at 49 million,
right,
and then later it grew to 500 million, then you're still okay. You still fall within the exception, which is where you get that $10 million or 100% of the gains back.
And the other thing I wanted to add was, at this point in time, based on what I'm reading, the IPO is becoming a not as beneficial an exit strategy as it once was, right? Because with these various rounds of financing, the money is being sucked out going forward before it's already been funded. Before the IPO is really necessary to provide the capital to expand and grow the business. So the people investing in the IPO, assuming a successful company, would normally do quite well. Now the thought is all these companies are valued and revalued through all the rounds, where the VC people and others that have been involved earlier will really reap most of the profit, because by the time it goes public, there's growth projection, but not like the growth they've had for the first 5 to 10 years. And so what that leads to is an exit strategy that doesn't really involve an IPO. It probably involves an acquisition by a larger player in the end. So you're not really moving toward the IPO. Moreover, with 1202, it works even better because you're moving to be acquired by the bigger fish like Instagram was, and you can walk away with tax-free dollars.
Right. There are some caveats to the 1202 exception laid out in 1202. You have to be an active business, and that has its own definition.
Can't be a passive business. Yeah.
Right. And it can't be held by or it must be held by a non-corporate taxpayer. So, or the ownership interest it can't be held by, say, McDonald's or something, or any sort of other corporation. It's really incentivizing the individual.
So really some of the subchapter S restrictions. No alien shareholders, no corporate shareholders.
Right.
Is there a limit on the number of shareholders? It's 100 with sub S. Is there a limit here?
I didn't see any limits on number of shareholders. The company does have to be under 5 years old. So if you want to get into the company early, I think that's...
The company has to be under 5 when you invest, and then you have to hold at least 5. Is that it?
Yes.
I hadn't read it in a while.
And I heard talks of potentially a bill had come up. I don't think it got much headway, but they were looking at changing that. And it's the same with the $1 million requirement for an accredited investor. They were looking at changing.
The SEC has put out a release modifying the accredited investor definition. We don't know whether it'll actually end up being an approved regulation. From time to time, as I understand it, the House has introduced legislation to make Section 1202 a bit more difficult, but it's unlikely that would pass under current political situations. So yeah, but it's a very important provision.
And there are two other ones that I want to touch on. Section 1045 is the investment rollover rule. So if your investment exits before 5 years, you can use 1045 to essentially roll into another qualified investment within 60 days to continue running your clock for 5 years, as far as I understand it. So if your company and the company you're invested in fails or something happens to it, you can then find a like investment. It's similar to the 1031
exchanges.
1031 exchanges. That's basically the parallel for investing.
If your investment exit, that means a sale, right? Not a failure. So if
I was unsure.
Can you take the money even if you didn't qualify for 1202 at that point? So you're saying before 5, you can. Wouldn't that mean if your investment is so the company you've invested in sells within a 5-year period, and you've got $200,000, but you're going to have to pay tax on it because you didn't meet the 5-year limit. You can take that money and put it into another investment within 60 days, so that the clock will keep ticking. Can you use the previous holding period?
Can you tack the previous
Yeah,
period on?
can you tack it?
I think that's what it's carving out. I'm just not sure
Okay.
if exit encompasses every exit strategy or if
It's a good point, though.
it would only encompass certain exit strategies.
Only a regulator could watch something like this. I mean, 60 days is a pretty fast turnaround
It's
period.
tight to find one of these, that's
And the other tax implication is Section 1244 loss acceleration provisions. So for tax planning, if you decide to go into tax, you're really going to want to make sure that if you lose on an angel investment, then you can accelerate the losses against ordinary income in that current year, which is a lot more, generally speaking, than the $3,000.
You can take all your long-term capital losses against ordinary income in the current year?
I think it has to be part of the initial $1 million of capital raised by the corporation, but up to that amount you can. So rather than getting $3,000 into perpetuity for a huge amount of money, you get it all at once against ordinary income. And I guess that I was having a hard time visualizing who this is going to affect. I guess angel investors primarily. But if you had a company owner who, well, no, I guess it would just be the angel.
I think it's still not as well as 1202, but it's certainly incentivizing by reducing the pain of a loss.
Right. Does anybody have any questions or comments or things that I can try to stumble through?
Any questions, class? You've done a good job. All right, class, we are adjourned. You can listen to this if you want, but I'm still struggling now in 2020 with this whole idea. I talked to Bill at length about whether the LLC really should be. Start out